Okay, dear friends, the topic today is Peseach Sheni, second Pesach, and second opportunities, second chances. I'm not the first one who uses this term, by the way. I noticed others. First of all, my friend, Rabbi Dr. Alan Brill, has used this term in the past, and I noticed that Esha Torah's online networks also uses this. But of course, we all have our ways of looking at things, and I will look from my perspective. First, I want to read to you the story in the Torah. The story in the Torah about Peseach Sheni. Peseach Sheni takes place every year on the 14th day of Iyar, which is exactly 30 days after Passover. Passover is the 15th day of Nissan, but actually with the Paschal offering, the Korban Pesach, was always brought on the, was always prepared on the afternoon before in order to be eaten in that evening, meaning on the 14th of Nisan. So the story goes like this. It's taken from Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 9. And it says in verse 2, Vayasu b'nei Yisrael the Pesach b'modo, in the Jewish people did, the Israelites, the children of Israel, did the Passover in its time on the 14th day, Ben Arabaim, towards the evening, which is when they bring the offering. And then Vaydeber Moshe b'nei Yisrael asot Pasach, and Moses told the Jewish people to do the Pesach, which is the Paschal offering. Vayasot Pesach barishon. In general, in the Torah, when it says Pesach, it refers to the Paschal offering, and Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of the matzah, represents what we call the Passover holiday. Barishon bar-ba'asar lechodesh, on the 14th day of the month, Ben Ha'arbaim b'midbar Sinai. This they did in the desert, in the Sinai desert, on the 14th in the afternoon, towards evening. Just like God commanded Moses, this is what the Israelites did. And there were a few people, Vahi Anashim, that were impure, because I guess they had touched the dead body, if they had a death in the family. So then you come in contact with the dead body, and you must do what's called the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer in order to be purified. And this takes about a week. And therefore, they must have happened then right before, Shalom Miri. It must have happened then right before Pesach. So they didn't have the opportunity. They could not bring the Paschal offering because they were not allowed. They did not qualify. And they gathered before Moses and Aaron on that day. Of course, it doesn't say what on that day is. And these people, and these people said to him, and to them, we were impure because we were in contact with the dead body. Lama nigara. This is an interesting term, nigara, which means why should we be shortchanged? Why should we have less? The Torah says about the mitzvot, lo tosef alav lo tigra mimenu. Do not add to the commandments of God and do not subtract. Ligara means to subtract. Why should we have less than our brethren? Why should we not have the opportunity to keep the Pesach? That we're not allowed to bring God's offering at its proper time, together with the rest of the children of Israel. And Moses says, Vayomer lehem Moshe. Now this is interesting. Moses doesn't say, okay, let's discuss it, or let's ask God. He says, Imdu veshma'a ma'itzav Hashem. You stand here, and I will hear what God says. And then, okay, then God says, Vayamar Hashem al Moshe, this is verse 9, verse 10, Daber b'nei Yisrael emor, this is what you shall say to the children of Israel, Ish ki atamer, any man which should be impure, or even if they were far away and didn't have time to make it back to Jerusalem or on time for the Passover, then on B'chodesh HaSheni, on that second month, because Nisan is the first month, on the second month, on the 14th day, Ben Ha'arbaim, at the end, which is Ben Arbaim, is towards the end of the day. Yasuato, you shall bring the Paschal offering with matzah and maror. Okay, so it's brought just like the Paschal offering of the 14th at night, the night of the 15th. It's brought together with the matzah and the maror, like it says about Pesach on matzot umerorim yochluhu, that the Paschal offering is eaten together with matzah and the bitter herbs and maror. And just like the Paschal offering, it shall not be left until morning. Meaning you have to, if you do leave it after 12 o'clock at night, you have to destroy it, you have to burn it before morning. And the bones are not supposed to be broken, just like the laws of the Passover. And therefore, Isha Sherhu Tahor, but if a person was pure and they did not have this excuse and were not far away and purposely did not keep the Paschal offering, then the penalty is karet, which is a question what that means, but etc. However, if somebody was impure or if they were far away, they have the possibility of Peseach Sheni. What is Peseach Sheni? I want to compare this for a moment with another story in Bamidbar. The story is a little later in Bamidbar in chapter 27. In chapter 27, the daughters of Tzlofchad also approached Moshe with a question. You have a few places like that in the Torah, but not a lot. And the question is, the 5 daughters of Tzlofchad, Machla, Noah, Chogla, Milka, and Tirza, stand before Moses. In fact, some of the wording here is actually a little bit similar. So there it says that they came before Moses. Here it says they stood before Moses. Petach or HaMoed, there it says they stood at the entrance to the tabernacle, which is interesting, where there it doesn't say that here. But then the daughters of Tzlofchad say like this: our father died in the desert, and he was not one of those who took part in the rebellion of Korach. He died for his own sins and had no sons. Remember, according to Torah law, the inheritance goes to the sons and a double portion to the oldest son. Now they use the same term, Lama Yigara. Why should we be shortchanged? Why should we get less? Shem Avinu, why should the name of our father receive less in his family just because he doesn't have a son? Let us inherit the inheritance together with our father's brothers. Now here, Moses doesn't say, okay, God will now tell you what's going to happen, but it says, Vayakrev Moshe Mishpatan, which means God brought their case to God. It says Moshe brought their case to God. Here, even though the same term Yigara, the same argument, why should we be lacking, why should we have less? So with the daughters of Tzlofchad, it says Moses brought their case to God. However, here, in this one, it says, stand and I will listen what God will command. It doesn't say that he brought their case, their mishpat, their court case to God. It just says, God will tell you, just stand here, I'll listen, I'll tell you. So it sounds like in the first case of Peseach Sheni, Moses is absolutely convinced that God is going to say something. In the second case, with the daughters of Tzlofchad, he's not sure. He says, I'll bring the court case, God will decide. Why in the first case is he absolutely sure that God is going to say something, and the second case, not sure? So, I'm going to hold that thought for a moment and get back to it. I want to describe for you for a moment how Maimonides, Rambam, describes Peseach Sheni at the end of the laws of the Paschal offering, of the Korban Pesach. This is it's in Mishnah Torah Korbanot, Korban Pesach chapter 1, paragraph 20. Maimonides writes like this: Hashochet Pesach, if a person slaughtered the Paschal offering on the 14th day of the month of Nissan, and discovered after they slaughtered the offering that it was had some type of blemish, and it was a treifa, meaning it had a life-threatening problem, and because of that, it's disqualified and it's not kosher. So let's say they slaughtered a paschal offering, a potential paschal offering, let's say a sheep, and then they checked and they saw it had a problem. And then they did it again, and again it had a problem. And they did it again, and again it had a problem. Each time it got disqualified, even if it was 100 times. And then finally it got too late, because you have to slaughter the paschal offering before dark, before the 15th. And it got too late, and there was no time to do another one. So Rambam says, this person, it's not their fault. They will do it again on the 14th day of Iyar. It's just interesting how Rambam presents this. In other words, because you would think this guy slaughtered a paschal offering, it was disqualified because of something wrong, and again it was disqualified, and again you think, is this maybe a little sign from God that maybe he doesn't want your paschal offering? Rambam says no. You do it again, and hopefully it'll be good. It didn't, even 100 times, just keep doing it again. If you did it 100 times, and all day long, and for some reason, you still didn't find a kosher paschal offering, not a problem. You come back again on the 14th day, a month later, on the month of Iyar, and you try again. The way Maimonides describes it, it really sounds like second, third, fourth, fifth chances. Now, what does that mean? So I want to answer first the first question. Why was Moses so convinced that God was going to give a clear answer when these fellows came over to him and said, look, we were impure, we didn't bring the paschal offering, what can we do? Why didn't he say, I don't know, because it's over. What can we do? I mean, I'm very happy to bring the case before God, but, like he said with the daughters of Tzlofchad, let's bring the case before God. Why does he say, just stand here and we'll hear what God commands? It sounds like he was convinced. I'll tell you what I think. You see, the reason why Moses was convinced is because in his own life, he had a second chance. Let's think of Moses for a moment. He's a young man. As a baby, he was supposed to be killed, of course, together with all the firstborn. Of course, he wasn't actually, with all the males, I'm sorry, he wasn't the firstborn. Aaron was the firstborn. But all the male Israelite children were supposed to be killed by the decree of Pharaoh. And his mother, Yocheved, put him in the Nile in a little basket. And his sister Miriam watched over to see who would pick it up. And Pharaoh's daughter shows up to pick up the basket, and she sees the boy, and she realizes it's an Israelite boy, but she has no problem with that. He's obviously more liberal-minded. And she takes the boy, and Miriam walks over and says, you know what? Maybe should I find a woman from the Israelites to nurse him? She thinks that's a good idea, and she gets Yocheved, of course, to nurse the baby. Now, Moses grows up in the palace. And when he is grown up, it doesn't say when, maybe he's 20 years old, maybe he's 30 years old, but it says, Vayigdal Moshe, he grew up, so he must be a little bit more than a teenager. And it says he walked out to his brethren, which is already a statement, because it calls the Israelites his brethren, people he'd never seen until then, because he didn't grow up with them. And Moses sees what's going on, and he is in shock. And he sees an Egyptian policeman, an Egyptian soldier smiting a Hebrew slave. And Moses feels, I must have been groomed for this moment. I must be the one who's going to save my brothers, the Hebrews. And he looks right and left, and he smites the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. Jacob ben Asher, in his commentary called Bala Turim, writes, if you take the Hebrew word Vayachat HaMitzri, which means he smote the Egyptian, the word HaMitzri the Egyptian, is the same numerical value as Moses' name in Hebrew, Moshe, 345. Because when Moses kills the Egyptian guard, he's killing the Egyptian within himself. Because if anybody finds out, there is no going back to the palace. And his Egyptian life is now over. But Moses takes that chance and he smites the Egyptian and simultaneously the Egyptian within himself. And that night he goes back to the palace because nobody knows. The next day he comes out again and he's hoping that maybe the Hebrews will hear what happened, that there's some VIP aristocrat from the palace who's on their side, and maybe he will now install excitement and enthusiasm and revolution. Instead, he walks out and he sees two Hebrews quarreling with each other and fighting. And Moses said to them, "Why are you hitting each other?" He said to the evil one, "Lama takerecha, why are you doing this? Like bad enough the Egyptians are doing it. Why are you doing it to yourself?" And that guy, called the Rasha, looks at Moses and says, "Who decided that you are our judge? Are you going to kill me like you did that Egyptian yesterday?" And then Moses realizes that people knew about it. And what it doesn't say in the verse is he also realized there's not going to be a revolution because you need people for a revolt and the people don't seem to be interested. And then he runs away to Midian. Because if you want to lead a revolt, got to have a people. You want to be a general of an army, you need soldiers. And if people are not ready for salvation and redemption, it's not going to happen. Moses goes to Midian. He meets his wife Tzipporah and his father-in-law Yitro, Jethro, and he lives a quiet life as a shepherd. When did he go to Midian? Again, it's not clear. It was after he grew up, could have been 20 years old, 25 years old, probably maybe as late as 30 years old. How long is Moses in Midian? Decades. In fact, until God appears to Moses again, the first time, because God didn't appear to Moses until then. But he's in Midian until God appears to him in the burning bush. When God appears to him to the burning bush and he goes to Egypt, scripture in Shemot, in Exodus, says that he was 80 years old and Aaron was 82. Now, assuming he left Egypt anywhere between 20 and 30, let's take the later age, 30, he's living in Midian for 50 years. Most of his adult life. Maybe all of his adult life. He's living in Midian as a shepherd for Jethro. I'm sure he thought about many times in his young days when he wanted to lead the Jews into revolt, and he was willing to give up everything which he did, and he was willing even to give his life to lead that revolt, to take his brethren out of slavery, but they turned their backs to him, and he had to run for his life. And I'm sure he probably thought many times, if God would have just given me that opportunity, I could have done it. And then at the burning bush, God appears to Moses and says to him at the beginning of the book of Shemot, he says, "The pain and the suffering of the people of Israel has come to me. I want you to go to Egypt, and I want you to tell them that I have heard their suffering, I have heard their pain, and tell them I shall take them out, Otseiti, and I shall save them from the slavery and the bondage, and I shall redeem them, and I shall bring them to me as a people, the four expressions of freedom, and I shall take them into the land of which I promised their fathers." And Moses is in shock. In his mind, he's probably thinking, God, when I was 25, I wanted to do this. I was strong. I was learned. I knew how to fight. I grew up in Pharaoh's palace. I could be a military man. I had trained myself what to do. Now I'm 80 years old. What am I going to do now? What does Moses say to God? Shlach na b'yad tishlach. Find somebody else. My dreams are over. This is not for me. It's for somebody else. Moses says that, I'm sure, sadly, but it's a reality. He's now 80 years old. What exactly is he supposed to do? How is he supposed to be that military leader? How is he supposed to enthuse the people? And he's a kvad peh. He doesn't even speak well. He's not a good orator. He doesn't know the people. They don't know him. He hasn't been in touch with Aaron, his brother, or Miriam for years. Says, God, I'm the wrong man. He doesn't like saying that. He says, I'm a stutter. Send somebody else. Till God gets angry with Moses. And he commands him, he says, you're going to go, and Aaron, your brother, will speak on your behalf if necessary. What God is saying to Moses is, sometimes in life you get a second chance, but you know what? Whether you want it or not, because sometimes destiny plays tricks on us. And we think that things are supposed to go one way, and we have no idea that this mess is part of the destiny. So Moses goes, and it was very difficult. But because of this, for him, why was it difficult for him, by the way? Because he didn't think the elders of Israel would believe him because he didn't grow up with them. He was an outside man. That's why he really needed Aaron. And all the signs that he showed Pharaoh, he also showed the elders of Israel to convince them that he was the one. And only when they stood at Sinai, God said, when we stand at Sinai, they will believe in you and your destiny too, the Jewish people, because that was the Achilles heel of Moses' leadership. He wasn't sure the people would have faith in him. He was sure they would have faith in God, but not in him as a leader, because he didn't grow up with them, and because he expected everything to be different. And the first time, it really didn't go well. So Moses knew a lot about second chances. So when these fellows came and said, we really wanted to bring this Paschal offering, and we're going to miss out, what's going to happen, Moses? Moses already knew in the back of his mind, don't worry, God has unusual plans, and second chances really do happen, and sometimes whether you want it or not. And he talks to God, and God says, yes, exactly. On the 14th of Iyar, 30 days later, they will bring the Paschal offering again. I want to read to you a little bit how the second Paschal offering is described, again, in Maimonides' Mishnah Torah about the laws of the Paschal offering. There's a few unusual things here. So he says, Mishayat Tameh, if a person was impure at the time that you were supposed to bring the Paschal offering, or they were far away, or something else prevented them, something which was beyond their abilities. Maybe they got sick and they had to be in the hospital, they couldn't, whatever. Like there was this fellow in the United States who was in charge of Hatzalah who got COVID-19 exactly right before Passover, and he couldn't keep the Passover for he did the second Passover at his home. Pesach, so you bring the Paschal offering on the 14th day of the next month of Iyar, and it's a mitzvah for all the generations. And then Maimonides writes, what's the difference between the first Pesach and the second Pesach? It says in the first Pesach, of course, you're not allowed to eat leavened bread, chametz, and you have to bring the Paschal offering with the matzah and the maror. In the second Pesach, you eat matzah, but the chametz is also around. You don't have to get rid of it. And you don't have to say the Hallel, the prayer of thanksgiving. I think these things are very symbolic. Let's just think for a second. What is the meaning of second chances? I gave one example of Moses. Well, what does it mean in life to have a second chance? There are two examples that are brought by the Torah, and I want to use these as metaphors. The first one is if a person is impure, meaning they did something which made them impure. It could be getting very often it's a dead body, whatever, but I'm going to use this metaphor of impurity, of also walking on the wrong direction. Young people, very often in life, make mistakes. And because of this, we expect that. Young people are there to make mistakes. That's the metaphor of being impure. But since they're young, if they make mistakes, they can always try again. So if they're 18, they make mistakes. At 20, maybe they'll wake up and do things differently. 20, they make mistakes, maybe at 25. 25, maybe 30. But young people, you expect them to make mistakes because that's also part of the learning process. And if they have a good heart, they will learn and finally pull themselves together. But then you have a second type of Peseach Sheni, somebody who was on a far trip and couldn't make it back on time. What does it mean to be on a far trip? Well, there's a far trip that could happen in two ways. As Maimonides says, either you prevented from something, or you just took a far trip because it took a long time. What does it mean to be prevented? To be prevented is, for instance, let's say you lived your life and as a young man, there was a war going on. Second World War took 6 years, destroyed lives. That's taking a really far trip and it really was not your fault. People had to build themselves up again. It took a long time to rebuild themselves. Everybody needed a second chance after the war. Sometimes a person is sick for years. They need that second chance. You had people like Natan Sharansky, spent years in a gulag, in a prison in the former Soviet Union, needed a second chance when he came out. But then there's another third type of second chance, which I also call being on the far road. Somebody who took a road in life, who decided that that road made sense. But later on in their life, they're wondering if they're still on the right road. And they feel that whether this road was okay or not okay, I need to change the road. I still need a second chance. Sometimes people like that, people make fun of them. You're not a young person, how are you going to start again? But the Torah doesn't say that. Peseach Sheni is for everybody. So even people who are on a long road and they thought that the road was correct, and it wasn't because of the mistakes of youth, but they landed up on that road. Maybe it was a routine in life, and they still want a second chance. That can also happen. And that's also part of Peseach Sheni. You know, it's interesting, the concept of bringing a Peseach Sheni is only Passover. We don't have it for Shavuot. We don't have it for Sukkot. It's only by Passover, which is interesting. You could say because Passover is the first of the pilgrim festivals of the Shalosh Regalim. I think part of it is because also Passover is in the spring. The spring is like the Renaissance, rejuvenation of life. Because as I said, second chances are something that very often we assume are young people, because young people you assume make mistakes. But as I said, there are three types of second chances. There are the young people, which is called impurity, and then I need time to fix my way. Then you have people who are withheld, which is called being on a faraway path, but beyond your control, as Rambam says, anusu, whether war, famine, disease, or whatever. And then you have those who took a path, and it wasn't that they were held back, but they thought that was the right path, and one day they turned around and said, I need to try a different path. I think I can fulfill my life better on a different one. That's also a second chance. And in fact, that's exactly what happened with Moses. Because Moses had to leave Egypt, and he lived his life, his adult life in Midian. He lived a good life, but he really wasn't doing what he really wanted to do. And he was in total shock when God revealed himself to him and said, Moses, you were right the whole time, and now at 80, you're going to go down there and save the children of Israel. But we don't know how destiny plays out, and we don't actually pull the strings. So things can actually surprise us in life. And when the surprises happen, you also have to take the reins and take control and do what must be done. So all these things come to mind when we think of Pesach Sheni. Now, in actuality, in Halacha, Pesach Sheni today is just a custom. It's just a minhag. Because when all the Jewish people cannot bring the Paschal offering, then Pesach Sheni is not necessary. But Pesach Sheni still is an idea, is a very important idea at the beginning of the agricultural year, which starts in nissan, to realize there's some things that sometimes withhold us. And sometimes it's because of ourselves, but there's always a second chance. Toda Rabbah. Thank you very much.